Hello, welcome to the chapter 14 video. So I'm gonna go ahead and work through a couple of problems from your book here. And I'm gonna be starting at page 415. So let's go ahead and get going with number 1. Your patient has had a craniotomy, has Seclor suspension 250 milligrams PO 4 times a day ordered. What should be used as the diluent? So if you look at your books, this page is much more clear, unfortunately, because of me printing it and putting it into OneNote. It's kind of blurry now, but right here are your directions for mixing. And it tells you that your diluent should be water, okay? So there's not a whole lot of space for me to write here, so I'm just going to write it off to the side. So water is the answer to that first question. How many milliliters of water should be added? And that's 90, right? 90 milliliters. So those are our answers for the first two questions. Now, how many milligrams are in the bottle? Okay. So we got to look at a couple of things here. We have our listed dosage, right? We know that it's 125 milligrams per 5 milliliters, right? However, the entire bottle is 150 milliliters. So we have to figure out how many milligrams are in the whole bottle in these 150, okay? So using dimensional analysis, I find is the easiest way. So I'm going to set it up as XMG because we're looking for how many milligrams are in the bottle. Okay. Using my dosage, I know that I have 125 milligrams for every 5 milliliters, right? And then I'm going to multiply by the 150 milliliters that make up the entire contents of my bottle, right? So my milliliters will cancel out, leaving me with my milligrams for the whole bottle. Let me do 125 times 150, and then I divide by 5. So I get 3,750 for that question. Okay. Now there is one other way that you could do. So you know that 125 milligrams is for every 5 milliliters, right? So if you divide 125 by 5, you get 25, and that's milligrams per milliliter, right? And then you can take that 25 and multiply it by the 150 milliliters to get how many milligrams are in the bottle, and you'll get the same 3,750. Okay? All right. I'm going to erase this part. And let's move on to the next question. How many milliliters will you administer each dose? Okay. So this question is like all the other questions we've already been solving in the previous chapters. You know, how many milliliters do you need to draw up for your patient to give them the dose that's ordered, right? So XML, as we do, right? Again, you're going to use that dosage strength that we know, the 125 per 5. We're just going to flip it upside down. Okay. And then back in our question, right, our order was 250 milligrams. Right? So our milligrams will cancel out, giving our milliliters for our order. So I'm going to do 5 times 250 and then divide by 125, and I get 10. Right? So 10 milliliters will be our answer to that fourth question. And then our final question is, how many doses are in the bottle, right? So we know that that entire bottle is 150, right? It tells us right here. We just figured out that it takes 10 milliliters to do one dose, right? And so to figure out how many doses, right, X doses, one dose, 10 milliliters, times 150 milliliters, bottle, right? And so 150 divided by 10, right, is going to give you 15 doses. And that's our answer to the final question. 15 doses. Okay. We'll move on to number 2. We'll keep practicing this. So, licensed prescriber ordered Keflex 275 milligrams every 6 hours from Mr. Smith. What should be used as the diluent? So again, unfortunately, in my picture here, it's very blurry, but if you look in your book, you'll be able to read it. So right here, directions for mixing. Your diluent is water again, right? So I'm just gonna write water, right? How many milliliters of diluent should be added? So I think this says 36 milliliters. Okay. How many milligrams are in the bottle? Okay, so as I did before, right here is my dosage concentration, right? And then up here, it's telling me how many total milliliters are in the bottle. So I will do X mg, because I'm looking for how many milligrams are in the bottle, using my known dosage, 125 over 5 times 60. Right. And I get 1,500. Okay. Again, you can do the other way, so where you just figure out how many milligrams it is per 1 milliliter. So you'll take that 125 and divide it by 5, giving you 25 milligrams per milliliter. And then you take that 25 and multiply by the 60, right here, 60. And you'll get the same 1,500 milligrams. Okay. I'm gonna erase this again so I have space. Okay. Now, how many milliliters will the nurse administer per dose? Okay. So we start as we do, XML, right? Take our dosage and just flip it upside down to make it work for us. 125 down here, right? Our orders in the question, so 275. And I get 11 milliliters as my answer. Okay. And then final question, how many doses are in the bottle, right? So X doses, we know one dose is 11. And from the label, we know that the whole bottle is 60 milliliters. So 60 divided by 11, gives us 5.4545, right? So in these cases, I have you round down. So it will be 5 doses, 5 full doses are available in this bottle. Okay? All right, let's keep going, keep practicing. Okay. Mr. Davis receives cefaclor 600 milligrams every 8 hours for the treatment of acute bronchitis. What should be used as the diluent? All right, so again, in your book, this will be clearer, but the directions are right here, right? And so it says that my diluent is water. How many milliliters of diluent should be added? Let's see, 62. Okay. How many milligrams are in the bottle? All right. XMG. All right. Looking right here for my dosage strength. So in this case, we have 375 milligrams for every 5 milliliters, right? And my bottle right up here, 100. Okay. Let's do the math. Okay, so I got 7,500 milligrams. That's in the whole bottle. Okay. How many milliliters will we administer per dose? Right. So using my dosage strength, I just flip it upside down. My order up here, 600. Oh, not bottle order. Okay. And I get 8 milliliters. Okay. And then a final question, how many doses are in the bottle? Right, so X doses. We just figured out that one dose is 8 milliliters. And we know that the whole bottle is 100. So this is going to be equal to 12.5, which as I did in the previous problem, I'm just going to round it down and say that there's 12 full doses in the bottle. Okay. Moving right along, number 4. A patient with a temporal bone infection receives penicillin G 500,000 units. How much diluent should be added? Okay. Let's see. So it's right here. And this is one of those where you can make a choice, right? Because if you add 9.6 milliliters of diluent, your concentration will be equal to 100,000 units per milliliter. If you choose to add 4.6 milliliters of diluent, your concentration will be 200,000 units per milliliter. And if you add 1.6 milliliters, your concentration will be equal to, what is that? It either says 300 or 500,000 units per milliliter, but again, I can't really tell because it's blurry. So the important thing is here, just like pick one of the numbers and make sure the concentration that you use to solve the problem matches how much diluent you picked. Okay, so I'll show you. How much diluent should be added. So I'm gonna say that I'm gonna add 9.6 milliliters of diluent. Okay. What is gonna be my medication concentration? It's going to be 100,000 units per milliliter, right? So then for number 3, how many milliliters will I give? Let's figure it out. XML, right? I know I just said that my concentration, right, is 100,000 units, right? And then my order is 500,000 units, right? So my answer to this question will be 5 milliliters. Okay. Now what you could do, right, is if for number 1, if you didn't want to do 9.6, you could say 4.6. Oh, let me make that a little thicker. Right, 4.6, right? But then your concentration is 200,000 units per milliliter, right? So then to solve the third question, how many milliliters will you administer? You have to use that concentration, right? It will be milliliter per 200,000. You multiply by your order. Right, and now your answer's 2.5. Right, so it matters which diluent you pick because your concentration will be different, therefore your answer will be different. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to orange, right? And what is it asking me? What would you circle on the label to indicate concentration? Oh, well, that's silly. But it's right here. Okay. All right. Let's try another one of these with number 5. Let me pick more colors here. We'll stick with green, actually. Okay. Your patient with a thoracotomy receives penicillin G 600,000 units IM twice a day. How much diluent should be added? So again, we're looking right here, right? So let's say again that I want to do the 9.6 milliliters. Okay. What is my medication concentration in that case? Well, it's going to be 100,000. Okay. And then how many milliliters will I administer? Let's figure it out. XML. All right. I'm using my chosen concentration because of my chosen diluent amount. So in this case, I'm getting 6 milliliters, okay? If I choose a different concentration, right? So if I want to go with the 4.6, then my concentration becomes 200. Right? Thereby, how many milliliters I give will also change. So in this case, I'm getting 3 milliliters as my final answer, right? So for questions like these, right, it doesn't matter, right? You can pick whatever diluent you want, right? You'll have the concentration that is equal to the amount of diluent that you picked. Then you have to figure out how many milliliters will you administer, right? So as long as your answers, match up, you'll get the question correct, right? The only time that you'll get it wrong is if, you picked, here, let me do it in red. Like, say you wanted to use, like, 4.6, right, as your diluent, right? But then you told me that your concentration was 100,000, right, which is wrong, right, based on your label, right? That's not what your label says, right? And then you did the math and you told me that it was 6 milliliters, right? Which would be correct based on this concentration, but that's not the concentration that you got because of how much diluent you used. So you'd be wrong. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Number 6. Okay. Mr. Rose has Pfizer pen 250,000 units. I am now ordered. How many milliliters will the nurse administer if 8.2 milliliters of diluent is added? Okay, so we have to look at this label, and we're looking right here. Okay. So from what I can tell is if we use 8.2 milliliters, our units per milliliter equal 500,000 units, right? I'm gonna go with that. Okay. So that's step 1 to figuring this part out, right? It tells you how much diluent is added, but you have to figure out what the concentration is equal to using that part of the label. Okay. So then for number 2, I can figure out how many milliliters I'm going to give, right, for my dose. Right, and so this is equal to 0.5. And that's my final answer. Okay. Let's try another one. Mrs. Garden has penicillin G potassium, 175,000 units. I am ordered. If 18.2 milliliters of diluent are added, how many milliliters will the nurse administer? Okay. So same label again, we're looking right here. Right? Looks like 18.2 milliliters of diluent gives us a concentration of 250,000 units per milliliter, right? And so now we can use that to figure out how many milliliters we have to give to the patient. So XML and I get 0.7 as my answer. Okay. All right, let's move on. Lorabid 500 every 12 hours is ordered for a patient with pneumonia. How much diluent will be added to the bottle? Okay, so these are the questions like we did in the beginning. Let's see. Your directions for mixing are right here. Looks like it says I need to add 60. We'll go with 60 milliliters of diluent, right? What is my concentration after reconstitution? So it's right here, right? 200 per 5. Or if you're reading the label, it's also down here. Each 5 milliliters contains blah, 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 equivalent to 200, right? So my concentration is 200 milligrams for every 5 milliliters. Okay. And our last question, how many milliliters will the nurse administer? So XML, right? We know our concentration. I'm just gonna flip it upside down to make it work for my dimensional analysis. My order is 500, right, up here. Let's math this out. And I get 12.5 milliliters as my final answer. Okay. All right. Number 9, licensed prescriber orders oxacillin 250 milligrams every 6 hours. How much diluent will be added to the bottle? All right, let's see. Right here. So it looks like it says 2.7 milliliters of sterile water. So 2.7 milliliters. Okay. What is the concentration after reconstitution? Okay, let's read the label. And I think it's just below it, right? So each 1.5 milliliter contains 250 milligrams of oxacillin. So our concentration is 250 milligrams per every 1.5 milliliter. It's a bit of a weird one, but we'll just go with it. Okay, and then as the previous questions have asked, how many milliliters will we give? So XML, right? We're using that concentration we just figured out from the label, right? Our order is 250, right? So we're gonna give that 1.5 milliliter. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Number 10, licensed prescriber orders vancomycin 500 milligrams for a patient with pseudomembranous colitis. And yes, I did just show off by saying that. How much diluent will be added to the bottle? All right, let's read this label. Right here. So, how much diluent? 20 milliliters. 20 milliliters of deionized water. Okay. What's the concentration after reconstitution? It is right down here, So, 5 milliliters contains approximately 250 milligrams of vancomycin. So we're going to say 250 milligrams for every 5 milliliters. Okay. And then number 3, of course, how many milliliters will we give to the patient? I'm using the concentration we just figured out. I'm just going to flip it upside down. My order for the patient was 500. Right. And so when you do the math, you'll get 10 milliliters as your final answer. Okay. All right. Number 11, which I think is our last question. Yeah. Okay. Your patient is a 74-year-old male who's ill with acute bronchitis. He has a history of acquiring acute bronchitis each fall. He's 5 foot 10 inches tall, weighs 180. His temp is 10. Okay. Okay. I'm actually not going to do number 11 because I don't ask questions like these on the test. So I'm going to skip it, which wraps up this video. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.